What is earnest money? You found the house you love, your offer gets accepted, and now your agent says you need to put up earnest money. Are you paying the seller? Can you get it back? And what happens if the deal falls apart? Let's break it down. 1. What is earnest money? Earnest money is money a buyer deposits as part of a real estate purchase agreement to show the seller that they are serious about purchasing the property. Think of it as a financial commitment attached to the contract. The exact amount and terms depend on the purchase agreement. 2. Is earnest money the same as a down payment? No. This is a very important distinction. Earnest money is not your down payment. If the transaction successfully closes, the earnest money is generally credited towards the buyer purchase price or other amounts due at closing, according to the contract. So you're not necessarily paying that money on top of your down payment. 3. Where does the money go? Earnest money is not simply handed directly to the seller. It is generally held in escrow or trust account by the party designated under the purchase agreement. The contract and applicable Alabama rules determine how the funds are handled. 4. How much earnest money do you need? There is not one universal amount that every buyer has to pay. The amount can depend on the property, the contract, negotiations between the buyer and seller, and local practices. So do not assume that every home requires the same amount. 5. Can you get your earnest money back? This is where you really need to pay attention to your contract. Depending on the terms of the agreement, a buyer may be entitled to have earnest money returned if a permitted contingency or contractual condition isn't satisfied. But if a buyer backs out of a transaction without a contractual right to do so, they could potentially risk losing earnest money. That's why it's important to understand your contract deadlines. 6. What happens if the deal closes? If everything goes according to plan, the transaction moves forward to closing. The earnest money is generally applied according to the contract, often as a credit toward the buyer's amount due at closing. So it becomes part of the overall funds being used to complete the purchase. 7. What if the seller refuses to sell? If a dispute happens over the transaction or the earnest money, do not assume you can simply take the money back immediately. The purchase agreement, applicable law, and the circumstances of the dispute determine what happens next. That's one reason the earnest money provisions in your contract matter so much. Simple example. Let's say you make an offer on a $250,000 house and the contract calls for $2,000 in earnest money. You deposit the $2,000 according to the contract. If the purchase successfully closes, that $2,000 may be credited toward the amount you owe at closing. But if you decide to walk away without a contractual right to do so, you could potentially put that $2,000 at risk. Important buyer tip. Here's my biggest tip. Do not treat earnest money like a refundable deposit you can automatically get back whenever you change your mind. Your purchase agreement controls. Know your inspection deadlines, financing deadlines, appraisal provisions, and other contingency before you sign. So now you know what earnest money is. It's basically a financial commitment that shows the seller that you're serious about purchasing the property, and what happens to the money depends heavily on the terms of your contract. If you're buying a home in Alabama and want to understand the real estate process before you make an offer, subscribe to my channel. I'm Sunil, your Alabama real estate agent, and I'll see you in the next video.